Hi, welcome to the CSS Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your instructor for this tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about styling elements using inline styling. Part 1. This is actually a three-part series. We're going to look at the three different types of CSS styling that we can do in our HTML documents. And the first one we're going to look at is inline styling. So styling elements using CSS. CSS was introduced together with HTML4 to provide a more efficient way to style HTML elements. Up to that point, we'd actually been styling the elements in the HTML documents. And even though it worked well, it was very difficult to maintain large websites as we were styling individual elements on the individual HTML pages. So CSS can be added to HTML documents in three different ways. We have inline styling, using the style attribute in the HTML elements themselves. Each HTML element actually has an attribute called style. That allows us to use styling attributes inside of those element names. We also have internal, where we can actually use the style tags, which are located in the head section of the HTML document. And actually now in HTML5, you can actually have style tags used inside of elements themselves, and we'll talk about that when we get to that particular section of the tutorials, which is going to be in part 2. And then in part 3, we're going to look at the external style sheet, using external style sheets to style our CSS styles to our HTML documents. The preferred way is to use external style sheets, but we'll look at all three different methods over the next group of tutorials. CSS, or cascading style sheets, allows a variety of ways to style elements on your HTML page. 3 to be precise. We'll look at the inline stylings in this particular tutorial. CSS, or cascading style sheets, is the styling language that we use to style the layout of our web pages. HTML is for content and structure. CSS is for styling. The selector of a rule set identifies the HTML element that the styling rule should be applied or pertain to. What exactly is the selector of a rule set? Well, let's look at that, at what exactly a selector is, in the next slide. CSS relies on pattern matching rules to determine which styles apply to which elements in the document. These patterns are called selectors, and they can range from tag names, for example, the heading tags, the H1 through H6 tags, to paragraph tags, which is the P tag, and all the other tags that are available in our HTML document. The patterns can become quite complex as we become more specific in the identification of what we're actually trying to style. And you'll see that as we work through the CSS tutorials. Some of these patterns can become extremely specific as we relate or begin to style certain areas of our pages. A CSS selector is a part of the CSS style that identifies what part of the web page should be styled. So let's move into the development environment, and let's go ahead and demonstrate some of the things that we've talked about in these slides, and let's get some real-world examples of using inline styles in CSS. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is, like we do in all our tutorials, let's go ahead and set up our environment to make sure we're set up to do our testing. I'm going to go ahead and drop out of the presentation. Let's go in and confirm that we have got our Apache servers up and running, which you can see that it is. The next thing I want to do, let me go ahead and show you the directory structure that we have working for this particular tutorial. I'm in the web root of my CSS tutorials. This is my inline styling tutorial. You'll notice I have a CSS directory, image directory. Don't have our basic document in there yet because we're going to create that during this portion of the tutorial. So that's the structure that we're working with, the CSS directory and an images directory. Nothing yet inside that web root. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my browser window, which is loaded into the web root, our InStyling tutorial, and my text editor. I'm going to use my Sublime Text 2, as I have in most of our previous exercises. I'm going to go ahead and bring that in. I want to go ahead and go into the exercise file under example 1. I'm going to go ahead and load up our basic template. So I'm going to copy that. If you have access to that file, that would be great. Go ahead and paste that in your text editor. I want to go ahead and do a save as. I want to save this as the basic template. Let me go back into our web root. And I'm going to save this as basic template. Let's go ahead and show this as details. Basic template. .html. Go ahead and save that file. And let's go ahead and refresh that browser window and load that up inside of our browser window. Okay, so now we've got everything set up as to where we're starting. We've got our basic document loaded. We've got our web root set up. I've showed you the directory structure that we're going to be using. Now would be a great time to pause if you need to type this in. Let me go ahead and confirm that I got my word wrap on, which I do. Now would be a great time for you to pause if you need to type that in. And let me go ahead and scroll down so you can get the rest of that screen if you need to. Again, a good time to pause if you need to type in the rest of that document. Excellent. Okay, so we've got our document saved as our basic template HTML. Now we're going to go in and start doing some demonstrations on what we do with inline styling. All right, as we progress with the tutorial series in part 3, we actually will be building a base.css file to work with. But for this tutorial, we're going to focus on inline styling. So let's look at some basic code selectors in CSS, and let's demonstrate how inline styling works in our CSS document. So, inline styles are good if we have a unique style that's needed to be applied to one single occurrence of an element on our particular page. Like if we had a heading that we wanted to style completely different than anything else on our website, that would be a good candidate for an inline style because it's something we're only going to use once. And the reason I say that is because these styles, when you start doing inline styling, it's hard to maintain, especially if you have hundreds of pages to your website. And you're going to see that as we progress through the tutorials. So when using inline styles in CSS, we use a style attribute in HTML inside the element that we're wishing to style. The style attribute can contain any CSS property that's part of the CSS styling language, and using the style attribute lets us style one particular part of that particular element. So for example, let's go ahead and style this paragraph element that we have in our page. I'm going to go ahead and take out this extraneous spaces. I'm not sure why it does that when I paste it in. But anyway, I'm in the paragraph tag, the first paragraph tag under our body element. And what I want to do here is I want to type in my style attribute. And I'm going to say equals, and then in double quotes, I'm actually going to put a few styles inside this paragraph tag. So I'm going to give the font color, let's make it blue. I'm going to end that with a semicolon. Then I want to put in a space. I'm going to put in a margin left, colon. Let's give that 20 pixels, end that with a semicolon. And then let's change the font size of this particular paragraph. So I'm going to say font size. And by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but these are the same. These attributes are the same attributes that we would use in an external style sheet, as you'll see as we progress through CSS. So these styling declarations work the same way here that they do in the actual CSS documents. And let's make our font size 1.2em and end that with a semicolon. Keeping in mind that everything is enclosed in our double quotes. Let's go ahead. I'm going to do a save as. I want to save this as chapter 15 _ 02. Chapter 15 _ 02.html. So that we're saving this as a separate file. In the event you have access to the exercise files, we'll save that as a different file. Let's go ahead back into our browser window. Let's go ahead and refresh it and load that document we just saved. And you'll notice now that paragraph has picked up the attributes that we've given it in that inline style. We've given the text a color of blue. We've taken the margin left 20 pixels in, so you'll notice it's 20 pixels inside of our other text, the other line elements that are inside, or block level elements that are inside that HTML window. And we've changed that font size to 1.2em, so the font in this paragraph is larger than the font in the other paragraph. We've actually made it a larger font by styling it inside that paragraph tag using the style attribute. We can change different colors. I mean, if I want to make the color red, I can just go in here and make it red. And I can actually use different values also. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and save that and refresh the browser window. You notice that our font size has changed, but I could actually use the hexadecimal values also if I chose to put my colors in that way. If I wanted to make the font, let's say we wanted to make it a gray, a light gray. I could actually come in here and give the hexadecimal value for that with my #CCC, save that change, refresh my browser window, and now I've got a light gray. So I can use any of the values that I'd use in a normal CSS document inside that style attribute of the P element. And keep in mind that all of the elements or all of our tags in HTML have the style attribute. I could actually change the font size. I could actually go from M's, which is, I tend to use M's when I'm doing my sizing, to pixels. Let's say we made it 18 pixels. Save that change, refresh the browser window, and you can see again, change the font to an 18 pixel font instead of that 1.2em font. And if I want to go back and make the font something it's a little bit easier to read against that white background. Let's say I want to make it a light blue. I could do 0CF. That would be a light blue. Refresh that window. And again, it's something that's a little bit easier to see against the white background. The limitations to inline styling are the fact that if I start styling using inline styles, and we'll go through a couple more demonstrations, but you'll notice that if I start styling using these inline styles, it becomes very specific to that particular element, and it's not affecting anything else on my page. So it would be very difficult to style an entire website using inline styling. Inline styling is more for the case where you have something that you want to get very specific on, and you know that you're probably only going to use it once or twice in your web document, in your HTML page. And even at that, to be honest, as a developer, I would use a class. And you'll learn more about classes as we go through CSS. But even in that aspect, an inline style is not the best way to go. All right, so let's look at another example. Let's go ahead into one of our heading elements and change the background color of the heading elements. If you remember from previous tutorials, our heading elements, as well as our paragraph tags, are block level elements, so they take up all the vertical space in their style. So if I give a heading 1 element, I know that it's going to go across the entire page, because that's what a heading element does. It is a block level element. So let's go ahead and change the background color of one of our H1s. So I'm going to go up here to this first H1 that we have. And this is something that I've actually have done when styling some of my web pages. So I'm going to type style just like we did before, equals, put in my double quotation marks. By the way, that could be single quotes also. I'm going to say background color. Then I'm going to put in my colon, and I'm going to say 1C, 5C, 7, 8, and that with a semicolon. I'm going to give the font a color, because now I've changed the background color of the actual element. Let's give the font a color itself, and I'm going to make it white, because I happen to know that that background color that I've used is a dark color, and I want to give it a padding on the left of 25 pixels, so I'm going to move it off that left edge 25 pixels in. So I'm going to say padding left, colon, 25 pixels, and that with a semicolon, and then make certain I've closed it with my quotation mark. I'm going to go ahead and save that add. I'm going to save that change, but I'm going to save this as chapter 15 underscore 03. So again, we've got another work file inside of our folder. Let's go back into our web root, refresh, and load that 03 document. And you'll notice now what I've done is I've actually changed the styling of the background of that H1 element by the background color, and in turn changed the font color, and I took it 25 pixels from the left edge. I could actually change the height of that by actually adding a line height in here. And if I gave it a line height of, let's say, 45 pixels, you'll notice now when I save this change and refresh that this block's actually going to get wider and our text stays centered in it. So if I was making a heading for that block level element, now you've seen how you can actually take that area and stand it out from the rest of the text that's on that page. By using line height, I can actually change the width or the height of that particular block level element. And you'll see that as we learn more and more about CSS. But again, we're demonstrating styling inline elements. And I want you to see that you can use all the same properties, all the same values in your inline elements that you can use in your actual CSS style sheets. All right, so we've had a couple of good demonstrations of inline styles. Let's go back into our presentation for a moment. Talk about some of the things that we've discussed and prepare for our next. So let's move back into the development environment. Inline styles. So inline styles are used in HTML, but they're not the most efficient way to style an HTML document. As we saw using the inline style attribute, you can put a style attribute in any of your tag elements or your HTML elements and use the same type of declarations that we use in CSS. But again, it's not the most efficient way that we would actually do this because we're styling individual elements. If we had a large website, it would not be it would not be a very efficient way to style that particular website or that particular document for that matter. So this concludes styling elements using our inline styling for part 1. In part 2, we're going to look at using the style tag in HTML and how that's much more efficient than using inline styling.